They sang as they walked, a cracked murmuring like the sound of bees shaken from a comb. Men and women in frayed cloaks with 7-pointed stars stitched in coarse thread upon their breasts. They carried poles with lanterns that swung and clinked, and with each sway the light licked the road, and the road licked back, showing pits and stones and the huts of those who came out to stare. The pilgrims' feet were bare and blackened, and their prayers were simple. Mother, see us. Warrior, walk with us. Smith, temper us. Maiden, keep us clean. Crone, show the way. Father, judge justly. Stranger, turn aside. And they said them with the obstinate endurance of peasants who had lived through 3 winters' worth of wolves. Tyrion Lannister walked among them with a staff and a hood that hid his hair. He had shaved his beard close with a dull blade until his cheeks were a red map of cuts. Under the hood, his eyes kept working. He had always been small. Now he made himself smaller. He moved as men who have learned something of the world do. Chest caved, shoulders loose, feet cautious, weight where it could be shifted fast. When a woman stumbled and spilled a basket of turnips, he bent to help her gather them and said nothing. When a poor fellow limped with a split heel, Tyrion offered the skin of watered wine he had saved, and the man gulped it, coughed and showed his broken teeth in gratitude. No one asked him his name. No one thought of naming a man who carried his own shame like a pack. The road from Stillfen to the capital had been quieter than rumor allowed. There were burned trees where soldiers, one banner or another, had cut their anger into bark. In the ditches, a dog's skull watched him with the patience of bones. Yet the fields had been sown, and here and there barley ran like a pale green rumor across the hills. Children stood at the edges of hedges and peered from behind their mothers' skirts. Tyrion had been behind skirts himself once, when men came with their laughter and their pity. He had learned early the taste of both. At night, the pilgrims camped in circles like wagoners, with their lantern poles stuck in the ground to make a charmed yard of weak light. The poor fellows told stories of miracles that were mostly careful retellings of small decencies. A loaf left on a windowsill. A fever that broke after a single candle had been kept burning before the maiden for 3 nights. An old man's leg that knit straight after a brother had built him a crutch. Tyrion drank very little. Wine sharpened edges for him as a file might open a lock, but it dulled other edges, and he needed them all. On the morning they saw King's Landing. The fog lay thick upon the mouth of the Blackwater, and the city rose like a thing that had been dredged. Weed hung and wet and stubbornly alive. The pilgrims fell to their knees when they sighted the great sept, its many domes dull as pewter in the mist. Tyrion did not kneel. He stood and listened to the bells. They were ragged today, some slow and some hurrying, as if they had to get somewhere. He thought of other bells, the ones cut into the stone of the rock that were tolled by the sea itself, the caverns that sang when storms shoved their weight against the cliff, and the old secrets hummed back. He entered the city as he had once left it, with a plan that could be altered and a pocket full of promises to himself. The gate guards were men with undyed gambesons, the 7-pointed stars sewn large, and they looked at the pilgrims as if balancing mercy against the ache in their feet. Tyrion kept his head down and moved with the slow misery of the faithful. The stink passed the gate like a dog coming to sniff. Salt, tar, fish, rot gut, lavender from a peddler's crackpot of oil. Shit. He could not stop himself from sorting it. There was comfort in knowing what the odors meant. It gave the city a logic the court never had. The great sept of Beeler had been built to make men feel small. That was its one honest design. The steps were too many, and never the same number as the last time. The statues of the 7 had the good manners to be large without glowering. The candles multiplied like thoughts. Tyrion had once stood here in a crimson doublet that fit him like a joke, watching the gilded procession of the pious and the hypocrites, which in King's Landing were most often the same people. Now he stood in the nave and felt cold even where the wax had spilled and pooled warm. The poor fellows whispered and crossed themselves and went to their knees. A gaunt man with a simple robe and bare feet came toward them on silent soles. His hair was the color of dust, and his face had that boniness that spoke of meat in rare moments, and then only when served to someone else first. "Brother," the man said, "you have walked long." Tyrion dipped his head. "Master of small distances, if you please." The man's eyes were clear as well water. "You are welcome in the mother's house." He did not say the high septon, And Tyrion did not say the dwarf. He let himself be led. They did not go to a hall with a chair, nor to a chamber with carpets and a window that would admire itself if it could. They went to a cell. There was a bench, a pitcher of water, a stool, a single candle. The room smelled of soap, tallow, and the robe the man wore. Tyrion was offered the stool, and he took it. He had no patience for the false courtesy that would pretend concern for his height, and then make him stand. The man sat upon the bench and folded his hands. "They call me a sparrow," he said. "I do not object. Sparrows are common, and they do not fly high, but they know the fields. They eat what others drop," Tyrion said. "They survive winter," said the man. They considered each other like wagers laid out on a board. Tyrion studied the man's hands. The nails were clean, cut square with a knife. There was a small scar at the base of the right thumb. The High Septon had done more than bless. He had worked, and the work had been remembered by skin. "You have come to confess," the man said without asking. Tyrion smiled then. "To bargain. Confession is a bargain. A man brings his truth and is given a lighter burden." "I have tried my truth," Tyrion said, "and I found it heavy enough to drown me. I want another weight, one I can carry." "Name it." "Casterly Rock." There was no flinch. It would have disappointed Tyrion if there had been. The man's calm had fanaticism behind it perhaps, but also a species of comprehension. If you spend long enough among the ragged, you learn to count. Men counted sins. Women counted loaves, both counted favors. "The rock belongs to your house," the High Septon said. "That house owes the seven more than candle ends and words." He tipped his head, birdwise. "It owes us bread and men to build. It owes us coin. It owes us the honor stolen from the mother's face." "Incest," Tyrion said, letting the blunt stone of the word fall. The candle crackled. "And pride before that, and violence that used the father's name as if it were steel. You will not have liked my father then." Tyrion swirled the water in his cup and tasted it. It was good water. Cool, no iron. He did not care to give the gods their due. "Your father," the High Septon said. And Tyrion felt the man weigh the syllables as if feeling a purse for its contents. "Is beyond courts. And I am not. Dot I. No." The man leaned forward, elbows on knees, making of himself a small thing in a small room. "They say you slew a king. They say you slew your father. They say you whored your way through mercy." "No." "They say," Tyrion said. "The boy died from the soiled hand that fed him. My father died from a quarrel he had purchased long before he sat upon a privy. And I?" His throat closed for a little, then opened with a push. He had learned, too, to swallow his own flinches. "I loved where love made me, and that is a sin that rights itself no matter what men call it. The seven do not forget," the man said. He was not smiling. He was not unkind. "But they forgive when the scales are righted. You want the rock. I want justice for the small. The mother wants bread. The smith wants hammers that strike true, and not on skulls. The father wants the law to be law again, and not a tailor's tape that stretches to suit a lord's whim." "Bane." Tyrion set the cup down. "Then we agree. You seek an end to tyrannies that wear fine cloaks. I seek an end to a tyranny that wore my father's face, and then my sister's. I desire the rock to deny it to worse hands than mine." "Dah." "The worse hands will reach," the High Septon said. "What would you do? Bathe the rock in blood? Cut the beards from my poor fellows to make ropes, and take the walls with ladders built from them?" He shook his head faintly. "That is not a penance I will bless. Blood is expensive and breeds vendettas that outlast the butcher," Tyrion said. "My father taught me that in every action he took. No. If I take the rock, it must look like justice. It must smell like bread." "You promise bread," the man said. "I promise ledgers," Tyrion said. "Open ledgers, where tithes are not a lesser lord slush, and wars are not purchased with the seven's coffers. The West is rich. Gold is not food, but it buys food if men are not making ashes. It buys masons, It buys mercy for the children who grow up to hate because there was none. I promise that the faith's debts shall be paid not with words. I promise the poor fellows shall not be whipped from Lannisport for reminding a merchant's son that the crone sees through clever accounts. Benderander. And the incest. The law is the law. Bastardy is bastardy, even in silk. If the father must raise his hand, I will set it upon the anvil. The High Septon was quiet long enough for Tyrion to hear the city outside the stone and its odor. Somewhere a fishwife was haggling with a man who pretended not to hear her, then heard her anyway. Somewhere a lad was running, followed by his own stolen breath. The domes above them held echoes like coins in a moneylender's chest. If I give you backs, the High Septon said finally, it will be the backs of men with scars and bad boots. Yet they will stand between you and those who would carve you. The faith militant have swords. The poor fellows have sticks. Swords add up. Sticks add up as well. But I will not bless a sack. I will not bless fire. And you will bless a gate opened from within, Tyrion said softly. You are your father's son, the High Septon said. It was not a favor. I am, Tyrion said, and my uncle's nephew. Tyrion? A brief twitch at the corner of the mouth. They say he went west and fell off the edge of the world. They say many things, Tyrion murmured. He felt suddenly, stupidly, the ache he used to feel in the westering light in the rock's southern tunnels, where the sea sang its ancient song like a beast content in its cave. Tyrion liked to laugh. He understood that joy was not something to apologize for. He left me a key I never used. Then? The High Septon's eyes sharpened. A key. Not of iron, Tyrion said. Of knowledge. The rock was dug like a carrot. There are ways within it that are not on the maps we show our bannermen. Water knows them. So do rats. So did I once. The rock is guarded. The rock is loud, Tyrion said. It booms. It wheezes when the tide is wrong. In the right night, with the right men, a door can be opened from a place that is not a door. Bendawa. And when you stand inside, under a ceiling that does not fall upon you, then what? Then I kneel where men can see me kneel, Tyrion said. 8. The altar in our sept beneath the third western bell. The one that sounds like a cracked egg. I take an oath to the 7. I swear to rule as if the father watches, and the mother keeps my own table. I swear to repay what my house owes, and to cast out what it should never have housed. Bene. The High Septon's thumb traced the scar at its base. Penance will be public. You will strip to the waist and carry a lamp through the miners' quarter of Lannisport. You will listen to what is said to you, and not answer. You will eat with them afterward on benches without arms. Benchau. Armless benches, Tyrion said. I always knew the 7 had a sense of the ridiculous. You will establish a fund from your house's monies to feed widows, and the amount will be written on a board where all can read. If you attempt to hide coins where they will not be found, I will know. Mouse. You will not bless any man who comes to Casterly Rock seeking restitution and blood. I will not, the High Septon said. I will bless men who come asking for bread, and those who come asking for a hearing. I will bless those who surrender their knives because they see the warrior's shadow on your walls. Menem Satso. Tyrion breathed out. It was almost laughter. We will both have the work of our lives. The lives we have left, said the High Septon. It will do. But one more condition. The price rises. It must. You are accused of regicide and kinslaying. I cannot wash your hands like a stable boy washes a knife. There will be a hearing in the sight of the father. It will not be with your sister's paid magistrates nor your father's, for he is ash. There will be the 7's bench. You will present yourself when summoned. You will not flee once you hold stone. Meow. Tyrion found that he was tired to the marrow, and that he welcomed the fatigue. It quieted the part of him that computed. Call me, he said. I have run as far as I could run. We both know there is nowhere else left. The High Septon rose. We will walk west, he said. Slowly, with lanterns. Then no. Slowly, Tyrion said. And the word surprised him by tasting like relief. They set out within a sennight. The warriors' sons were knights for the most part, but not the shining kind who ordered silk and made pages cry. Their stars were bright, spotless as pride. Their armor was old and oiled. Their faces had learned to pretend to gentleness without surrendering to softness. There was brother Stevron, who had once been a younger son of a house that had fallen low after its lord had added a pair of crane's legs to his arms and lost them both for the joke. There was Sir Tallard of Case, who had fought at the Green Fork on the wrong side of a river and carried that wound as if it were a relic. There was a girl who called herself Sister Linnet and sang like a boy. She had the mother's eyes and the stranger's sense of humor. The poor fellows came by dozens, then by twos, then by fives, until they were a train that always seemed larger when seen from a mile away than when counted up close. The High Septon came on foot, and those who would have stopped them found their patience worn out by that stubborn, unhurried pace. The gold road unrolled before them like a ribbon someone had stepped on and wrinkled in places. They met merchants and traded news for bread. A miller told Tyrion that the mines near Nun's Deep had flooded again, and 3 brothers had gone down with a rope and come up separately, each with whitish lips. Tyrion dropped a coin into the miller's hand and would have dropped 2 if he had been sure it would not be spent on a dagger. A hedge knight fell in beside the procession and stayed for 5 miles, then wanted to bless Tyrion himself, and only when he had gone did brother Stevron say, as if remarking on a bird no one else had noticed, "Hardness in the eyes." He would sell anyone and pretend afterward it had been to the father. Bah. Better a hard man who admits it, Tyrion said, than a soft man who lies. But he kept another coin, which he had been toying with in his pocket, where it would not do harm. They slept under hedges and under painted ceilings. In the village of Sowater, a girl of 12 put her hand to Tyrion's face and pressed, testing as if for a seam. "There's no monster skin," she said afterward, disappointed but also pleased not to be afraid any longer. "I left it in my other cloak," Tyrion told her. She thought about that and laughed. Her laugh was like the little Bell's children still tied to lambs' throats. At the Golden Tooth, the road narrowed, and then went through the kind of stone that knew what it was about. The fortress stood like a molar set to bite a tongue. The Leffords had held here for longer than anyone wanted to recall. Tyrion sent Brother Corin ahead with a white rag fashioned from a pilgrim's shift. They were admitted within the outer gate with slow courtesy. Lady Lyra Lefford met them in a hall with banners that had been mended until the stitches themselves were a pattern. She wore a plain kirtle with brown thread at the edges. Her hair was bound with a cord that might once have held a money pouch safe. Her eyes were the West's eyes, the color of stone and rain with light captured in each, like a lie caught in time. She looked Tyrion over and smiled with half her mouth. "Cousin," she said. She could call him that. Half the West could call half the rest cousin. "Lady," Tyrion said, bowing as best he could. He had learned to make bows that did not look like pain. "I have come to trouble your gate. You troubled it mostly by walking slowly," she said. "We have had time to count you in 3s. They tell me you were once the king's hand." "Dandero." "For a season," he said. "It was a bad harvest." "They tell me other things," she said, "but we have bread instead of gossip. Will you eat mine, and then ask for what you came to ask?" He ate her bread, and it was good, round, with a roughness that made the tongue know what it was doing. He ate cheese that had been salted not to death. He drank small beer because there had been a fever in the northern villages, and the Wellstones were suspect. When they were done, Lyra set her cup aside and put her hands in her lap and said, "You cannot take the rock." "It would be the first time I could not have something I wanted," Tyrion said dryly. And when Lyra's left eye creased, he added, "I can take it. I cannot keep it without better hands than mine touching it at the same time. Those hands look suspiciously like yours, lady." "And now?" "My house follows the lions," she said. "The lions have made a nest where they should not," Tyrion said. "The father's eye is on the west. The faith will not bless the bastardry that props a queen's pride. I have backs." "Nender." "You have backs," she agreed. nodding not to him but to the High Septon, who had stood silent as a chair and as immovable. "Do you have bread? The kind that feeds a year and not a day?" "I have ledgers," Tyrion said. "Ledgers are lies that tell truth," Lyra said. "We will see. The first truth I want, your gait," he told her. Not the exact turn of the hand nor the count of steps from the third pillar in the belly of the rock, but enough. Her mouth did that half smile again, the kind women use when boys are trying to be men. "You intend not to bleed my courtyard," she said. "I am devout but not soft. I have men." "I will not strike a leopard," Tyrion said. "You will collect our dead if there are any. You will stand where men can see you, and not be afraid. You will have bread that is not purchased by making orphans." "Mendersund." She studied him like a tapestry, looking for where it had been repaired. "Your father would have sent you to the wall for speaking to me so." "My sister would have sent my head to my father," Tyrion said. "The one wrong and the other too late. You will do it without fire." "I have promised," he said. She exhaled. "Then go. The tooth will not be closed to the crone's lanterns. If you bring me a paper with numbers that add, and coin that clinks and is not half sand, and if the rock is not full of blood when men tell the tale, then my husband will not trouble to remember another Tyrion besides you." "Bah." "I find myself content to be the only one," he said, and for a moment, the old quick wit and the old wound looked at each other as if through glass. He bowed again, true this time, and kept his face turned down until he was out of her hall. They descended into the west like a rumor made flesh. Lannisport flowed about them in a broad bowl of light and ladders, cranes swinging, ropes thick as a man's wrist moaning when drawn over piers. Ships moved with the grace of men who had learned that grace broke bones as surely as stupidity. The smell of tar lay upon the air like a blessing and a warning. Tyrion stood upon a knoll and felt the tide turning, because the rock underfoot felt it and told his bones. He closed his eyes and counted the sea's heartbeats. When he opened them, he saw the rock as he had seen it as a boy. The line that had grown out of the cliff, massive and patient, its mane the carven ledges, its eye a window looking over the expanse men had decided to call their home. There was a sept in Lannisport, old and dignified and scraped raw by war and rebuildings. The High Septon went to it first with his poor fellows, leaving the warriors' sons to arrange themselves where they would be seen and not shot. They rang their bells. The sound was thin at first, and then filled up. A boy with a flute tried to copy. An old woman scolded him gently for the vulgarity, and then hummed along anyway because she had always liked music. The line to the mother's altar grew longer than the one to the father's. The silent sisters came out like shadows who had discovered they were capable of being kind. To the rock went word as carefully as a man places his foot upon a rung that might be rotten. Sir Forley Prester was Castellan, and had been so through seasons of famine and fear. He had the jaw of a man who had learned to grind meat without teeth, and eyes that were not cruel but narrow, as if he suspected sunlight of trying to trick him. He sent back. The gates were closed against sedition masquerading as piety. The rock remained loyal to the Queen Regent and the King. Any who wished to pray might pray at the city's septs, and were welcome to do so provided they did not preach against the Lord's peace. Tyrion had the message read aloud to him twice, then handed it back to the boy in the Prester livery, with a coin and a draw of bread. "Tell your master that the mother does not bless bastards," he said, "and the father does not bless liars. Tell him I desire a hearing in the sight of the seven on the claim of the rock. Tell him I will take it without drowning his men if he allows me to open the septry within the rock, and if he refuses, I will open a different door." Menderwimc. The boy's mouth worked. He was 13, perhaps. Boys of 13 always believed that their next word would change the course of the day. "My lord." "Not yet," Tyrion said. And the boy ran, shoes slapping stone in the way of a messenger who will only ever be late or too early. He waited until night. Waiting was a craft. He did not drink. He walked through the miners' quarter and saw food that was mostly salt and flour, and what a woman could coax out of bitterness. He counted the men who wore pouches like small bellies and paid respect to those who had calluses upon their palms, as well as clever eyes. He spoke quietly in corners, and those who spoke back looked both honored and afraid, and told him what they knew of the ebb and slur of the rock sea doors. Knowledge multiplies like mice if you leave crumbs. On the second night, the tide that had gnawed for 1,000 years rested its teeth where the old drains coughed. Tyrion and 3 poor fellows with rope around their waists and knives in their boots went down the steps cut into the cliff long before a lion had been imagined. The steps were slick, as if a time when men had had too much wine had spilled itself, and then had never dried. He went first, because pride is sometimes the only talisman a man possesses. If he slipped, at least he would slip for his own reasons. The culvert's mouth was a stone grin rimmed with bams and weed. The water's voice was very sure. Tyrion laid his palm to the lip and felt the pulsing of it. The rock spoke, and he remembered being small and putting his ear to a wall, and feeling it hum with secrets he could not translate. He put his back against the stone and slid on his haunches until he could set both feet upon purchase. The world became cold and large and salt and patient. The fellows followed, their breaths loud, their whispered prayers growing softer as their mouths discovered they could not form them without tasting brine. The tunnel's first part was the worst, because it reminded the lungs of what they were made of, and then asked them to prove it. Tyrion moved as he had been taught to move in spaces that were not meant for him. One hand before the other, the knife drawn not to threaten, but to warn stone. He counted without counting. He reached the flattening that his hand remembered from childhood. He had come this way once with Tyrion, laughing, soaked, beating Tyrion in, and then pulling him along by the scruff when the boy had cried. And there he found the rusted grill that had been set after the last time men had tried to come this way. It had been set clumsily. Tyrion grunted through his nose and ran the knife along the frame, feeling for where the iron had married rock and where it had only flirted. He found the flirtation. He had a little wedge of well-oiled oak in his sleeve, useful for more things than a man might think. He set it where iron lips had failed to kiss, and he leaned. The poor fellow behind him lent his strength as one might lend a shoulder to a wheel. There was a sound like a tooth, deciding it had had enough of staying in a mouth. The grill gave, a hand's width, then another. Water hugged them and tried to take a kiss. The wedge splintered, and then held a little longer. Once more, Tyrion said, although he had not had breath for words. It did not matter. Words could be put into actions and believed there. They pushed. The iron came away in a gout of cold that punched him in the sternum and drove him back one step and no more. He nearly smiled. He had always liked stubborn tools. Then they went in. Within, the rock's breath changed. It was warmer, close, tasting a little of men. Tyrion stood and hunkered, and stood again, going by memory and by the way the air moved. The poor fellows kept their knives down and their hands up. He admired them, even as he suspected them of choosing rituals over wits when pressed. He led them to a stair that had no right to exist. It climbed into the rock like a thought under a skull. At the top of the narrow place, there was a door. It was not impressive. It was old oak bound with iron, well oiled by the moisture the sea offers unwillingly. There was an iron ring with a salt stain beneath it. Tyrion pulled once and the ring was quiet. He knocked softly with the pommel of his knife and waited. He counted breaths. 3 tens. He knocked again. On the 6th count of the 4th 10, a voice whispered on the other side, hoarse with caution. "Who?" "An usher and no audience," Tyrion said. "Open or leave me to marry the damp." There was a pause long enough for the knives to consider their own edges. Then a bolt slid, and he saw an eye. It regarded him with the sort of stunned contempt that a man saves for a cat who has opened a chest. Then the bolt came back, and the door opened upon a narrow passage where torches failed to banish the cave's old resident night. The man on the other side wore the colors of House Prester faded to civility. He had a face made for suspicion. "You're small," Tyrion said. He stepped past him and into the passage, because sometimes that is the only answer that suffices. "Have you a bell?" "What?" "A bell," Tyrion said. "I have to ring it." It was like walking inside a skull. The rock's interior had always seemed to him a head aloof from its body, full of voices that had chosen to become stone. He followed the path that his feet remembered. It took him along a wall with niches where his father had once made servants stand when they had spoken too loudly of things the Lord did not want to have to make commands about. It took him leanly to the sept within the rock. He paused upon the threshold. Lamps smoked. The 7 watched him from their alcoves with the patience of gods who had watched worse men come pretending better. Tyrion went to the mother first, because no matter how clever a man is, he often knows enough to seek the one who forgives. He bowed, and he whispered against the cold stone breast, and he did not beg because he had discovered begging begets only middlemen. He made a promise that he had already made. Then he turned, and there were servants. And there were men with swords who looked bewildered to find themselves in a sept with swords drawn. And there were a few ladies with their hair in nets, who had come to pray for sons at sea or daughters in labor. Tyrion lifted his hands and showed them empty. "I am Tyrion of House Lannister," he said. And when their inhalations sounded like pebbles sucked down by a tide, he detested himself for the old pleasure that stirred. A man who has been looked at seldom forgets the odd hunger to be seen. "You are wanted by the crown," one of the guards said. He said it like a man reciting a recipe for a dish he hated. "I am wanted by the 7, Tyrion said lightly. "They are nearer. You may put your steel away if you have a mind not to profane. I will not run. I wish to ring a bell that will call men to bread rather than to blood." The septon in charge here was a little old man with a back bent into a question. He wore a robe mended so often the patches had become the point. His hair was the color of the wax his candles bled. He looked at Tyrion. Tyrion looked back. "Do you serve the 7? The septon asked. "Or yourself?" "I serve the only thing that can make both worth the trouble," Tyrion said. "I serve order that does not crush men's throats when they question it. I serve the ledger that is not a cudgel. I serve the truth that if the gods hate bastardy, they will hate it in a king as in a cooper's brat." "Beow." The old man's mouth made a shape and then closed around it. He turned to the bell rope. His hand hovered and did not yet take it. "I will ring it," Tyrion said. "It is my penance, to be seen kneeling where men who hate me would prefer me crawling. Let it be seen." "Ben?" The septon hesitated only as long as a man allows for the possibility that someone else will climb a stair. He does not want to climb, and then he nodded. "The bell is yours to pull." Tyrion felt the rope like a snake. He pulled. The bell answered with a voice old as the mine shafts, old as the salt carved into pillars by hands more patient than greed. The note went through the rock and out of it, into the evening where the sea held its breath. It cut through the sounds of Lannisport, where men were grumbling at wives and wives at men, and the word for bread in one house had just become a fight. It reached the Prester men, and it reached Sir Forley playing at dice with himself in his head. It reached the warriors' sons on the hill, who stood and looked at one another with their hands at their belts. And it reached the poor fellows who stretched their legs under the stars and said the mother's prayer for sleep. He pulled again, and then again. The sounds piled on one another like a man stacking truths until they made a stair. People began to come. They came because bells do that to folk. They call them to weddings, to fire, to confession. Tyrion stood to be looked at. He wanted wine then. The deep red that had once taught him how to be both sharp and dull at once. He set desire aside as if it were a petulant tutor. He stood and let himself be stared at. It was a good penance. "Sir Forley Prester," he said when the Castellan came at last into the sept, smelling faintly of a man who had put his armor on fast. "You are welcome." "The rock is armed," Sir Forley said. His eyes were not cruel. They were simply tired of the work of not being fooled. "If you came to be cut down, you will find it a short favor." "I came to kneel," Tyrion said. And he did not have to feign the effort it took to do so upon stone, and to swear, "If the Father allows." The sept was filled now, shoulder to shoulder, a mass of cloth and skin and breath, and the rustle of 1,000 opinions. Somewhere, a baby cried, because babies honor no gods, but their bellies. Tyrion looked into the faces of these men and women whose lives had always been the margin notes in his father's texts. He spoke. "I am the son who did not please my father," he said. "I am the brother of a man who broke vows and of a woman who made them into shackles for others. I am the little lion who laughed in a world that told him to be quiet. I killed a man who had long ago earned an arrow and thought himself immune by the cunning of his cruelty. I stand accused of a boy's death which I did not desire, because I understood that children are the worst coin to gamble with. I come now not with fire, nor with sellswords, nor with iron from an eastern shore. I come with these bare feet. He set them forward so all could see the cut and the dirt of the road. And with these hands, which have been unclean, and may be again, I swear before the seven that I will rule this rock, if it be granted to me, as a steward, and not as a tyrant. I swear to repay debts owed to the faith. I swear to put bread in the mouths of the miners who have carried our house upon their backs. I swear to fling incest from the gates, even if it is dressed in damask. I swear to be judged when called. Ben Chao. He turned to the father's statue, and touched his brow to its foot. He turned to the mother and touched his chest. He turned to the smith, and spread his fingers to show them empty. A murmur filled the sept like bees again, this time frightened and excited both. Some men spat. Some women wept. Some of the Prester men found that they could not quite make their steel look at home where candles burned. Sir Forley's mouth flattened. He looked to the High Septon, who had come in with the invisible gravity of a man who moves rooms before he enters them. The old ascetic set his palm upon the father's rail and nodded once, a motion that was both a mercy and a trap. Trial. Sir Forley said. When called. The High Septon agreed. Before the bench of the seven, with the warrior's sword and the father's scales and the crone's lamp to see the ledgers. That word had begun to spread. Ledgers. It slithered through the sept, then through the rock, as servants in kitchens and cellars spoke it like a charm which could make a loaf be where there was none. Ledgers meant someone would look at what had been taken for granted and call it theft. Ledgers meant a pause before a lord's hand reached again. Until then, Tyrion said, bread. The first carts rolled that night. They were not his. They were Lannisport's, commandeered by the devout and the opportunists who had discovered that piety and profit could hold hands if one was careful not to introduce them by their names. Girls with flour on their forearms pretended that the sacks had been waiting for this very bell. The warrior's sons stood in twos at the edges of the crowd like hatpins, bright-starred and just sharp enough to prick. Tyrion walked among the tables set on the square before the city's sept and did as he had promised. Stripped to the waist, lamp in hand, he moved slowly, hearing everything, saying nothing. He listened as a man told him about a cousin crushed under timber because the steward had wanted to save a copper on rope. He listened as a woman told him that her eldest had gone to fair weather service at Crackhall and come back with the cough that never ceased and a child in her belly that ceased before its first scream. He listened as a boy of 10 informed him solemnly that he liked the sour bread best. His shoulders burned where the night breezes played upon sweat. His feet protested on cobbles. His back ached. He did not set the lamp down until the third watch, when the stars had decided that clouds had had enough of the sky. In the morning, Lady Jenna Lannister came to the rock, and with her came memory. She moved like a woman who had never had to ask twice for anything, and had learned that she often did not have to ask once. Her smile was a weapon. Tyrion loved her because she had never learned to love him and had not lied about it. Nephew, she said in the Rock's Hall, where the ceilings had always been a little too high and the torches always a little too eager. You have picked your moment clean as a bone. My brother would be proud of the timing if nothing else. My father taught me when to step, Tyrion said. He did not teach me how to do it without so many toes. I am trying a new dance. Without fire, Jenna said. And her nostrils flared slightly, as if the very absence offended her sense of housekeeping. Do you think that makes you better than him? Or only more likely to be bitten by men who fear you cannot burn them? I think it makes me different, Tyrion said. Better will be for the Ledgers to declare. They will not love you. She said. I have had the privilege of being indifferent to that most of my life, Tyrion said. I find it frees the hands. You will need hands, Jenna said. Yours are small. They are, he said. Which is why I will ask yours, my lady. She was too clever to laugh. She only leaned back and let out a breath through her nose, whose sound meant, "I knew you would ask, and I haven't yet decided whether I am flattered. If I give you my hands, you will do what with them? Don't. Take, give, want. In that order, because that is what keeps men from killing one another on the steps of a sept. Now, you will make enemies because you will give what others think is theirs to those who think everything is not enough." She looked past him to the High Septon, who had made a corner his own without the benefit of a chair. "You have picked a fine ally." "Or he picked me," Tyrion said. "Would you rather my sister had picked you, Aunt?" Jenna's laugh was like the crack of a whip that has never been used on a horse. "You have your mother's eyes," she said harshly. Joanna pretended I did not like her. It was not true. I loved her because she threw me out of rooms when I deserved it. She would have had you whipped for this stunt. "Then I am already punished," Tyrion said, and let her see his bare feet, the lamp in his hand that had weighed more than iron once the night had decided it would. "I welcome more if it buys me the rock for the right reasons." "The right reasons," she repeated, rolling the words as men roll dice they intend to cheat with. "Very well. You will speak to the Swifts and the Marbrands. They will give you coin and men to count it. The Leffords will watch. The Craycalls will wait to see who will be allowed to hunt here with hounds and who with words. The Farmans will ask you for ship's timber and tell you they had already been promised it by a lord who is now dead, but whose ghost remains obliging. The Paynes," her mouth bent. "You will not find the Paynes disposed to talk much." "I will bring paper," Tyrion said, "and the father's scales. And if they refuse, we will see what the bells weigh when set against their pride. And Jaime," she said, quiet her. "He will not come to you. He will not forgive you. He will not forgive himself either. That is the bad coin in this purse." "Then, I have already bought with it," Tyrion said. The weariness came then. A wave. He stood against it with pride because there was nothing else in reach, and pride at least offered a railing. "If he comes, we will pour wine and count scars." "If he comes," she said. "And your sister?" "My sister," Tyrion said. "She will send paper edged with gold and sharpened like a knife. She will send words that smell of lilies and taste of vinegar. She may send a man with a jar of green secrets if she can find some left. She will not come herself. She will have other prayers to mumble. Your trial will be demanded." "I have demanded it," he said. "That is my advantage. Men who ask to be judged look better than men who flee from benches." "Many." Jenna eyed the High Septon again. "The bench of the seven is not Tywin's table." "No," Tyrion said. "It has fewer knives under it, I am told." She snorted. "Fewer you can see. As for me," she went on, crisp as winter linen, "I will not throw my household's bodies against yours. If you bleed the rock, you will not be able to clean it, even with the mother's tears. If you starve it, we will remember, and we are good at remembering. I will give you a clerk who was once my husband's annoyance, and will be yours the moment he discovers that he loves your ledgers. I will give you a captain, Tristan of Red Lake, because he is devout and remembers how to count with his fingers when he is tired. I will come back in a month and see if the bread is real." "Thank you," Tyrion said, and did not bow because the rock had never been a place where bows did anything but perpetuate themselves. "I would say you are a good aunt, but I do not wish to insult you." "Do not," she said, and swept out, the room seeming slightly less honest after her absence. The days that followed were full of the kind of work that does not make psalms. Tyrion set up a table in a chamber that had once been used by a steward who had liked to beat his servants where his master could not see. He had the table moved into the light as a kind of exorcism. He brought in the clerks Jenna had promised, and some he trusted less, and some he trusted more, and then he trusted none of them entirely. He sent for granary lists and demanded to see them with ink still wet upon them. He asked the Silent Sisters for their records of the dead, and discovered they kept their neat accounts with the patience of women who understood that men's lies were just another noise the world made. He sent carts for barley, and when a merchant charged twice, He had a warrior's son stand beside his scale and count out weights, and the man discovered that his heart had been close to the 7 all along. He received letters. Swift offered pious hopes and a smaller pouch of coin than their arms demanded. Marbrand sent a man with a face like a broom and better figures. The Leffords sent silence, which is an eloquence. The Farmans sent a bolt of sailcloth and a list of trees they would expect in exchange. From King's Landing came a writ sealed with Tommen's seal and oiled in the way of things that have slept beside a man's fear. It commanded him to surrender himself and the rock to the crown and to prepare for trial under the king's hand. The High Septon set his own seal to a summons that called him to a bench, not the crown's. The 2 papers lay upon Tyrion's table like rival cats. He touched neither and worked instead. When the first pay chest to the faith was counted in the Rock's Hall, men came to watch as if a mummer's show had promised nudity. Tyrion let them see more than silver. He had the clerk read out the numbers, not in the mutter of office but loud, with care. So even those who could not read could taste the sound of a just tally. There were murmurs. Some were the end of grudging awe. Some were the beginnings of a grievance that had not yet learned how to walk. Tyrion listened. He drank water. He wrote a note on a scrap and had it sent to a miner whose cousin had been named in a quarrel he had not started. He had it sent by the poor boy who liked the sour bread and whose eyes shone as if the rock had given him a job and he had given it back a little piece of himself. He went each night with his lamp. He walked through sweat and through praise and through muttered hatred, because men who had seen their own hunger too long often refused the hand that fed them when it did not look like their own. He let them say. He did not answer. That was the penance and the power both. To listen as if listening mattered, and then to count the words as if they were weights on the Father's scales. On the 7th night, the sea rose with its old impatience and battered at the cliff below. The rock took it, laughing in its slow, stony way. Tyrion went to a high window in a passage only the house remembered, and looked out upon the black water being rearranged by wind. He thought of his father sitting where he now stood and trying to make the world as simple as his contempt. He thought of Shay, who had died because she had been there when a man who loved pride more than mercy found an easy way to make both shut up. He thought of Jaime, his brother, who had loved and failed to love, and then had cut the cord that bound him to honor because honor had laughed at him first. A raven tapped at the glass. It came like fate always comes, in a moment when a man thinks he might be permitted to finish a thought. The bird bore a strip of parchment tied in a knot that had been tied by fingers that did not trust sailors. Tyrion untied it and read. It was a letter in a small neat hand that had always refused to be hurried. Uncle Kevin's hand had written like that, and the sight of it sent an unexpected pang through him. For a moment he saw his uncle's kind eyes, and the way his mouth had always looked a little sad, as if he carried the knowledge that good intentions were poor weapons. But this was not Kevin. He was ash, and a whisper in a red keep corridor that had learned again how to keep secrets. This was Tommen's letter written by some careful man in his name. It named Tyrion traitor and called upon all good men to seize him for trial. It warned that the faith's presumption in matters of the crown's peace would be addressed. It said, with legal exactitude, that Casterly Rock would be considered in a state of treason if its gates were not opened at once to the crown's men. Considered, Tyrion murmured. The word was like curdled milk in his mouth. He looked to where the High Septon's summons lay. He thought of benches and of swords, and of scales, and of lamps. He thought of his feet, now scabbed where the cobbles had carved their pennants. He took up a quill. He began to write. He wrote to Tommen as one writes to a child who has been taught to say he is a king. He wrote to the High Septon acknowledging the summons and requesting that the bench be convened within 3 months' time in Lannisport Sept, where the people could watch and the gods could see. He wrote to Jenna to ask for Tristan of Red Lake's waspish opinion on a fortification plan that would make siege less of a temptation and more of an embarrassment. He wrote to Lyra Lefford, sending her numbers that added an information. He set down the quill, and the night seemed to be listening. He was tired. That was a luxury. Fear was a necessity. He allowed himself neither for very long. He blew out the lamp because he had learned to like the dark when it told the truth. Behind him, the rock's corridors breathed. Somewhere beneath his feet, the sea spoke its one word. Again. He said it back under his breath. Once, as if answering a beast you keep, because it has been in the house longer than you have. Again. He could do the work again. He would have to. In the morning, he descended into the mines. It was not necessity of ore that took him there. It was the oath. The miners received him with the same mix of curiosity and contempt any man has for a lord who does a thing with no obvious profit. He took off his shoes. He felt stone. He smelled sulfur and old sweat, and the iron smell of men who have had their skin polished by labor. He walked with a lamp. This one brighter than his penance lamp, because one must not make a symbol into a coffin. He listened to the creak of supports and the whisper of sand that always returns to the place that made it. He let a boy put grime upon his brow, because that was what boys did in places like this to mark a man. He let a woman hand him a cup of water that tasted of tin, because that was what women did when they wanted to remind a lord what their tongues endured. He spoke to the steward of the mines, a sharp-faced person named Marin, with the eyes of a man who had learned to make lists in his head, because paper was a luxury after a certain hour of the night. He learned where 3 carts had gone that were not in the book. He learned what rope had been stretched to the point of prayer. He learned which shift lost more men and why. He sent for new rope, and when a merchant answered that the price had gone up in the short time between request and response, a warrior's son with a bright star in iron appeared at the man's elbow, like the warrior's shadow, and the price came down with religious suddenness. When he came up again into the light, he did not wash at once. He wanted Lannister to see him as the earth saw him. He went to the square in his grime and walked with his lamp for an hour while the sun provided all the lamps a man might need. He saw the small, sour smiles of those who believed this oppose. He saw the grave gaze of a septa who had prayed at too many beds for the coin to ring like a proper joy. He saw a girl with hair like wheat and a new star stitched to her sleeve. He lifted the lamp, and the light fell upon her face and made her older for a heartbeat. Then he lowered it, and the years of youth dropped back upon her like a cloak. At twilight, a messenger came from the hills eastward, his horse coughing up dust. He brought no letters. He brought rumor the way a wind brings fire. A host was moving, not large but ordered, with banners that had once been often seen upon the Gold Road. The hand of the crown had signed something that gave a man of middling birth leave to collect whatever militia he could charm into duty and go west to take a look at a rock that had been declared disobedient. They were 3 days away and counting. Counting is good, Tyrion said, and dismissed the boy to bread and sleep. That night he called his captains. Tristan of Red Lake came with an expression like a drought. The broom-faced Marbrand man came with figures that looked like fences between fields men wanted to fight over. The warriors' sons came with their bright stars, and their sense that dying with a plan was better than living without one. The High Septon came and sat as if he had never moved in his life, which made the room grow still because stillness must be either respected or attacked, and no one had yet grown so unwise as to do the latter. Tyrion spread a map, but he did not point to places as if men were pieces. He pointed to wells and to ovens. He spoke of rumor and of pride and of law. He spoke of bells and of ledgers. He told them where he would put the men who would be seen and where he would put the ones who would not. He directed the poor fellows as if they were rope to be used where rope would not be expected. To hold, to bind, to remind men that a knot can be more than a snare. It can be a saving. He asked Tristan how the wind came in the 3rd hour after midnight in these hills, and Tristan grunted a word that was not quite an acknowledgement and not quite a compliment. "You have no fire," the Marbrand man said, as if accusing him of indecency. "I have lamps," Tyrion said, "and men. We will show them the rock in the city and the poor and the gods, all together. That is a sort of fire. And if they bring iron enough, we will count it," Tyrion said, "and the Father will weigh it." He did not sleep. He lay upon a pallet instead and watched the ceiling, which had been carved to look like branches with leaves. A spider went about its work among the leaves, and was not moved by the fact that men had made them to honor themselves. At length he rose and went to his window again, and spoke the sea's word back to it. Again. At dawn the bells began to ring of their own, because men pulled their ropes, and because the sea shoved the old bronze tongues, and because the mothers of Lannister knew it was time to look upon their sons and tell them that courage had very specific uses and fewer than a man thinks. Tyrion put on his best. It was not silk. It was a leather jerkin well made, with a lion worked on the chest by a hand that had thought better of making it too proud. He took his lamp. He took his ledgers. He took his tongue, sharpened on all his years. When the crown's men came into view upon the road, dust wrapped about them like a borrowed cloak. Their banners were a tide of proper devices and invented ones, and their faces were red from having believed that errands were easier because they had a king's name upon them. Tyrion went out a little way to meet them, not too far, just enough to make them understand that he was not afraid, and not unwise either. The warrior's sons ranged to his left and right, like punctuation. The poor fellows stood in small knots with their staffs like lines of verse. The leader of the crown's men rode forward. He had a jaw that had been made beloved by a mother who had not learned that jawlings could not keep a boy from foolishness. He held his horse's head well. He looked at the lamp in Tyrion's hand and then away, as if it had been an impertinence. "By order of the king," he began, and his voice carried as if he had practiced it indoors and only now thought to try it outside. "Louder," Tyrion said gently. "The father does not take decrees whispered to the ground." The man flushed. "By order of the king," he said again, and was louder. "Tyrion of House Lannister, you are commanded to surrender yourself to the crown's justice and to present yourself in King's Landing for trial. Casterly Rock is to be held by the crown's appointed Castellan until the matter is decided." "The crown's appointed Castellan is the mother this week," Tyrion said, raising the lamp a little. "Last week it was my sister. The week before, my father's ghost. I have another bench awaiting me, one where men come to stand beside the law instead of on its throat. And see, you will not defy the king," the man said, and his eyes flicked, unwilling, toward the domes of Lannisport sept where the light was taking a liking to stone. "This is treason. It is fidelity to a higher oath," Tyrion said. "But I'm not unmoved by a boy who writes letters with a hand that is not his own. I will present myself here, before the Seven, within 3 months. Let the crown send its men to argue that incest does not matter when the bedding is warm enough." There was a shifting in the crown's ranks. The back and forth of rebellion and obedience had arrived at the common soldier, and was asking him to choose which to hold in his teeth. The messenger's horse stamped. The man held the rein. "You cannot summon a king to the west," he said. "He is the sun in the south. Men go to him. Men go to bread as well," Tyrion said. He set the lamp down upon a stone, and the light pooled like reason. "It will be here. It will be public. Your master will look miserly if he refuses it. Go back and tell him that. Tell him also that the ledgers are open, and that the faith has been paid in coin and not in smiles. If he wishes the West's gold to run to King's Landing, he will see that it runs better when men do not fear that it will be used to buy them out of their last loaves." "Menatruste, you threaten the crown with the people," the man said, half amazed. "I threaten nothing," Tyrion said. "I have no fire. It might have ended there, in an exchange of papers in the dust. But dust has a way of looking like it wants blood. A young knight, no more than 19, and wanting to be 20 with glory to keep the new number company, spurred forward and leveled his spear. He would have looked noble to someone whose eyes were in love with old songs. The warrior's sons did not move. One poor fellow did. A man whose foot had never healed right. He stepped, and the spear point glanced upon his staff, and the shaft went down an inch. The knight might have held it. He did not. It slid. It struck a stone. The point snapped. So did his composure. He swore and reached for his sword, and Tyrion understood then that it is the little things that make men murderers. A broken tip, a laugh, a stain upon a tunic. He raised his voice, not with cleverness this time, but with the authority his father had always insisted he never possessed. "Stop," he said. He did not shout. He said it with such flat certainty that it made space around the sound for men to consider obedience. "If blood falls on this road, it will be the crown's. It will be spoken of as the morning his grace refused to be judged beside the gods. The poor fellows will not strike. The warrior's sons will not strike. You will not strike. You will go back with your numbers and your pride and your spear with its sheepish point, and you will tell them that the dwarf of Casterly Rock called for the bench and waited. Ben and yeah. The young knight's face worked as if there were a man inside who wanted to get out through the eyes. His captain touched his knee with 2 fingers that held a message worth a letter. Not today, not like this. The boy grimaced and threw the broken lance down because he had to do something. The Crown's captain backed his horse a pace and then a pace more. You have 3 months, he said, trying to make it sound like a mercy he had just decided upon. If the king does not come, he will appoint a judge. The 7 have appointed 7, Tyrion said. We will be waiting with bread and with books and with bells. Do not forget the bells. He watched them go. He stood without moving until their dust was a line on the horizon, until the only sound was the sea and the slow settling of men's shoulders down from their ears. He bent and lifted the lamp and felt its weight and found it manageable. He turned back toward the city and the rock that the world had always imagined immutable. He could feel it listening now. Stones listen in their way. They keep secrets and they keep faith better than men. He would have to teach men to keep both for at least a season. That night, when he walked with his lamp, someone threw a stone that missed, and someone else wept and kissed his hand when he did not move it away fast enough. And a child fell asleep upon a bench with his head upon his mother's thigh. The rock boomed. The bells answered. In the high places, wind argued with crenels as it always had, and the sea kept its one word close. Again, Tyrion thought, and smiled without joy and without despair, because both had their place and he had work. He raised the lamp, and the light opened a little space in front of him on the cobbles where a man could step. He stepped into it, and it moved with him, and for now that was enough. Oh, Kai Kandei. He slept 2 hours and woke with numbers in his mouth. They tasted of iron ink and of the dust that fell invisibly from the rock's vaults. Men imagined Casterly Rock immutable and therefore clean. It was a deceit. Stone shed itself forever. All great things did. He wiped his lips and found grit on his knuckles and smiled at the truth of it. Then he rose and put his feet to the floor and lived inside the day he had made. A bailiff from the Golden Tooth arrived before the ovens had finished their first loaves. He was a narrow man built like a lash, with a careful widow's peak and ink on the side of one thumb, as if he had once put his hand upon a ledger and could not wholly wash it away. He announced himself as Harl of Salabrook and proved it by producing a letter from Lyra Lefford, bearing a wax impression so faint Tyrion suspected she had pressed it on purpose that way to test whether men would pretend to see. Harl did not pretend. He held the letter in 2 fingers and the room in the rest. I am sent to pry, he said without offense. My lady requests numbers that add. She wishes to know if the faith's board is painted true. And now, then we will not be friends, Tyrion said. We will be better. He showed Harl everything the courts had taught him to hide, and what his father had taught him to bury. The bailiff went through the heaps with a lover's patience. He asked Tyrion to explain why one mine had been assigned 2 carts of rope in the last fortnight, when another had received 1 and a barrel of nails besides. Tyrion answered with the names of men who had died under planks and the measures of shaft timbers that had swollen in a week of unkind damp. Harl nodded and put a mark no one else would have understood next to a figure in the margin. He counted the sacks that had gone to the square and their cost against the coin that had come from families whose sons had died in gray anonymity so the ledgers could keep putting down weight. He ran a finger down the faith tithe and struck it twice. Hard, as if to make certain the mark would hold. Bread is bought, Harl said finally, setting his stylus down like a knife he had finished with. So are candles and rope and mercy. My lady expects to find sand in the coin. I have not found sand. He narrowed his eyes at Tyrion in what might have been amusement in mean light. Unless you have made sand into coin. That would be a miracle, and I am not qualified to bless it. Save your blessing, Tyrion said. Save your suspicion too. It will be needed. When you return to your lady, tell her the numbers add. Tell her also that if she wishes them to keep adding, she is to send me the names of 3 men in her demesne whose sons are idle. I will test them as clerks and make one of them my enemy by making him useful." Harl smiled with a part of his face that had not been trained for it. "I will tell her. She will test you in turn. She will send a man who will forget something at the end of your table. I advise you to keep it until the next time she visits. She will count it before she speaks to you." "Bettina. She is my aunt's sort," Tyrion said. "I am forewarned. Every hour bred 2 tasks." The rope walkers complained of mildew in a warehouse that had been fine last summer. Tyrion went and smelled it and told them that fine was not a word to be used more than once in a season. The harbor master started an argument with a septon about the use of the long quay for bread carts. Tyrion stood between them like a stake between fighting dogs until both rediscovered their childhood knowledge that a measured tone solved as much as a threat. The smiths came in a slow procession to speak of tithes. Tyrion listened to the oldest and spoke to the youngest, and sent them away feeling cheated in a way that satisfied both fairness and their vanity. Farming men from Fair Isle rode in wearing blue-gray and the sea's manner, looking like men who had learned to tolerate land only because it fed the ships. Their captain, a broad fellow named Bors, with hands you could have used to pack flour, regarded Tyrion as if deciding whether to believe his own eyes. "We do not like the Ironmen nosing along the shoals," he said at once with no courtliness, as if conversation were a rope and you must not let go. 3 longships were seen off Casey. They have not landed. They have counted. We count back. Then, if they come in a mind to try the nets, Tyrion said, you will dance them into a harbor that is not ours to mend. I have no ships to give you. I have timber. I have men who can make pegs that do not snap, because some lord preferred the look of them to the life of a mast. Take the pegs and the timber. Bring me word if they do more than snuffle. The Ironmen have a talent for getting men to call a raid a curse from heaven, so they need not be blamed for their own headlessness. And I will. Bors bared his teeth and might have meant it as a smile. You speak like a man who has heard a deck go soft beneath him. I speak like a man who has stood on stone and known it would stand forever, and then felt it move. Tyrion said, send me word. If they land, you will find poor fellows upon the quay with poles. They will not stop axemen, but they will slow them while your men do what they came to do. Then shall. And what is that? Send Ironmen to the stranger before the stranger comes himself, Tyrion said. He made nothing of it when he said it. He made nothing of anything, outwardly. He took it all into his pockets and into his mind, and let it rub there until it had turned either to a hole or to a coin. When a boy tumbled down the steps in the miners' hall and knocked over a keg of nails, Tyrion squatted among the scatter with him and picked them up and found his fingers bled and did not mind. When a Septis candle guttered and she reached her old hand into the flame to pinch the wick and failed, he took her hand and did it for her and blew on her pinched fingers as his mother might once have done, and the Septa wept so that he saw the girl she had once been come up through her face like a fish under deep water. He wrote nightly. He wrote to the Marbrands, to the Crakehals, to the Sarsfields of Sarsfield, who had once boasted banners, so green men said, their meadows were conscious. He wrote to Kenning of Casey and to the Banefords, to houses Brax and Westerling and the Greenfields. He wrote to Davin Lannister, who played at Warden of the West as if the piece had never been carved for his hand, and yet found that it balanced there. The answers came like rain, uneven and distracted, then steadier. The West watched. The West counted. The West remembered that when a man rang a bell and said the word bread, there was often a loaf at the end of it. At the rock's seamouth, in a chamber that had been cut to sound the ocean's temper, he met with Sir Forley. They spoke softly, because walls listen and walls speak. The Castellan had the look of a man sleeping lightly in a chair he might never be permitted to call his again. He had not tried to seize Tyrion in the sept. He had not tried to push him back to the culvert. He had done nothing that would stain his hands, and everything that would keep them busied always. You have put your lamp into my hall, Sir Forley said without rancor. It is an odd light. Lamps do not set tapestries aflame when they are tended, Tyrion said. You set me apart from your men, which was wise. You did not push me from a window which was kinder. "I am not kind," Sir Forley said. "I am a steward who was told that the throne owns this rock now by right of the crown in the boy's name. That is paper law. A certain sort of man likes to write it. I have lived here long enough to know another law. Stone law? The rock belongs to those who feed it correctly and who listen when it speaks. It is speaking. And what does it say? That my name will be spat if I open the gate to a sack," Sir Forley said, "and that my name will be swallowed if I stand aside when a lordful dwarf walks the miner's quarter with his ribs in the light. It says I should count. So I count. For now, I count you as a guest whose pen might be a broom, and whose broom might sweep me from my job if I am a fool. I intend to remain employed." "Man, then permit me to employ you," Tyrion said. "I want your lock inventories, not the ones you show your own clerks when they think they have hidden a few bolts at the back of the shelf. I want your tally of men whose wives pray for them by name. I want your keys to the smaller doors, and I want your oath not to use them on me in the night. In return, I will give you my oath that I will not bring men with torches through those doors." "Ben?" Sir Forley did not hesitate long. A Castellan who could not choose died under a lord who knew how to do it for him. He nodded once. "The smaller doors are old," he said. "They are not loyal. They open for the sea if the sea insists. I will show you the ones that insist least." He rested 2 fingers on the table as if it were a chest he meant to keep and added, "When this trial of yours is done, the rock must have a lord. The small cannot rule a place this size alone. Even the great cannot. It takes a house." "The house has been used to wear men like rings," Tyrion said. "It will have to content itself with fitting its own finger for a time. The rock has no patience for metaphors." Sir Forley said dryly, and then he left Tyrion alone with the ocean's chamber and its old wet breath. The summons to the bench ripened the way fruit does that has been wrapped against flies. The High Septon sent brothers to the corners of the west with lanterns and a steady pace that drove men to rage because they were forced to slow and count. The septs of Ashmark, of Silverhill, of Greenfield, of Craighalls town, where the smell of leather never left the air. Their bells told out a common bidding. Lords and ladies who would not have crossed a stream to see their own birthbeds were called to cross rivers to bring their pride into a place where it might be weighed. The Crown sent a paper protesting the venue and the temerity. The High Septon sent a paper back that was not paper so much as stone ground fine. The Seven's justice had been a wall long before any lion had learned to scratch his mark upon it. The Crown might send advocates. It would be allowed to say what it had to say, in words men would be permitted to hear. In the city, the breadline shortened, hurt then helped by their own success. Men who had eaten had the energy to demand work rather than loaves, and work took longer to build than anything that used rope and planks. Tyrion let the impatience beat on him as rain, and made himself a gutter that channeled the anger into canals he had already drawn with ink. He set a ewer hall, a place where widows might carry water, in exchange for copper enough to make a week's stretch. He set a sisters' bake, where the silent sisters could have ovens to occupy hands they had otherwise learned to fold over the dead. He set a counting day where all disputes up to a coin's weight were brought to a table in the square, and decided within an hour, with reasons spoken aloud and written down. One afternoon, when the light lay like flour, a boy tried to slip a spark into the ledgers. He had flint and the look of a child who had been promised absolution by a man who knew absolutions cost less than candles. The warrior's son at Tyrion's back did not cut the boy. He put his hand around the child's wrist and squeezed until the flint fell, and the boy cried, and the sound made 2 nearby women turn in fury, because crying was the first sin of men who wanted to make excuses. Tyrion took the flint himself and pocketed it, and then took the boy's hand and rubbed the blood back into it, and said nothing. That was the lesson and the punishment both. At sunset the boy came and stood beside him with shame collected like rain in his eyes, and put a little iron nail on the ledgers, as if nails were currency, and he could repay with it. Tyrion kept the nail and smiled at it alone when no one could accuse him of gentleness. The day Lady Lyra's bailiff returned to the tooth, 2 women in the miners' quarter came to the Ewer Hall to complain of a steward who had demanded their daughters as pay for rope. Tyrion had the steward called to the table. He came as black as a well with his anger. Tyrion set the ledger of rope before him, open to the page where his hand had written down the new price. He set the father's scales beside it. He put the man's own knife on the table, blade turned away. "You will speak the truth," Tyrion said in a voice that had always made men believe it was the only thing they could do, and still keep their teeth. "It will be witnessed. You will not be beaten. You will not be cut. You will not be forgiven if you lie." Many. The steward's eyes moved to the knife, and away in panic. He had been raised where law was the thing the Lord said before he demanded the thing that was not named. He stammered that he had not asked for daughters, only sweat, only carts pushed at the wrong hour. He lied as men do when the word lie has been cut out of their tongues by practice. The women stood with their chins up and their eyes upon the crone's lamp, which had become a part of the Ewer Hall on purpose. Tyrion did not judge him. He did not need to. The men of the rope walk stood and would not look at their steward. He shrank under that look, which has always been the poorest man's best weapon. He resigned without ceremony. Tyrion did not clap. He sent him away with his own knife and a quiet brother who would see him out of the city and not let him come back the same day to steal something to salve his outrage. Letters came with the scent of the capital clinging to them like sickness. One held Margaery's steady hand, a cordial hope that bread held. One held a square tight script that announced itself as blasted honest, and therefore required no addressee. Tyrion recognized the words of his uncle old friends who had learned how not to say Cersei when they meant her. Jaime's hand did not come. It arrived by another path. A farmer from Stony Septi brought in an eggshell clean, but for the 2 initials scratched into it by a nail when it was wet. J.L., Tyrion read, and his lungs forgot him for an instant. The farmer said a man had met him at a hedgerow and asked him to take the shell to Lannisport, to a dwarf with a lamp, and he had laughed and said as long as the shell did not hatch and leave him pecked. The man had smiled like a wound. On the 3rd day, after the eggshell came, a raven fluttered at dusk with a ribbon around its foot and a scrap affixed with pitch. Tyrion took it in his hands and felt something like sorrow move his fingers to gentleness. The scrap held a single sentence: "Stop dragging ghosts into church." No name. A hand that had written letters with a sword his whole life until the sword had begun to dictate to the hand. Tyrion read it and balanced his grief upon it like a tumbler. He wrote nothing back. There are letters that can only be answered by breathing for another day. The day the lords began to arrive, Lannisport preened and then remembered itself and stopped. Carts creaked under carpets that had been rolled up when tents had been taken down a year past. Palfreys jingled with harness that had been polished by boys who had never ridden. Aunt Jenna drove in under a modest canopy with a guard of 8 who carried themselves like 16. The Braxmen showed their purple ox and grinned as if the world were their joke. The Westerlings sent a cousin who had made a point of looking respectable, since men had learned the word Castamere as a warning. Sarsfield had a banner clean as the day it had been painted. Crakehall sent leather and a smile. The Leffords sent Lyra herself because she did not intend to be told what she had thought by a man afterward. They did not lodge in the rock. They could have demanded it. They did not. There was a wisdom in that, or a fear. Tyrion instructed Ser Forley to open 2 outer halls, and to appoint sisters to both. Meat and bread would be served, and wine watered to the point of virtue. Men would grumble, and the grumble would make them sober. A tent was raised upon the square where those too proud to hang their cloaks in public could pretend the old court had come with them in miniature. The bench was set in the sept nave, not upon a dais, but at ground level. The father's scales polished until they threw back the candlelight as if to say, "Look, even gods like shiny things." 7 chairs. 7 lamps. 7 books for the form. The High Septon took the central chair and looked, as ever, like a man who would have been as happy on a stool scraping potatoes. To his right a grave woman from Fair Isle, who had bled in her time as a midwife, and thus took the mother's place for the hearing. To his left a smith with shoulders like barrels from Crakehall's forge, his hands clean for once and trembling. a septa from Ashmark who had memorized law because she had 1 son and 3 daughters, and had no intention of seeing men cheat any of them into early graves. A bardless boy in white cyan intent to stand for the maiden's light. It was a bench in the eyes and in the bones. Tyrion went forward clean, with no wine in him and the memory of his lamp upon his shoulders. He made no speech. He put his palms upon the table where a man might have put his bribes, and left them there as if to show he had none to offer. The charges spoke themselves. Kinslaying, regicide, the presumption of setting the faith between crown and castle, the arrogance of bread. He let them pile like snow. When they ended, he asked one question and then another, so small they were almost insults to the gravity of the room, and watched them do their long patient work. To the charge of regicide, he asked for the names of the apothecaries who had served the king upon the days before his feast. To the charge of kinslaying, he asked if any in the room had not known fear when entering a privy, and whether that was proof of sin or survival. To the presumption, he asked where in law it was written that a king's name allowed a lie to enter a ledger and be counted as an account. They called witnesses. They were not such men as courts would have chosen. A brewer stood and told of the casks sent to the Sept and to the Rock, and how the coin had been counted twice in his presence and once again afterward. A miner's foreman spoke the measure of rope and the number of broken ribs, and how someone had written the count of the dead in a hand that did not shake. A little sister told of women who had eaten at last and dared to sleep 2 hours at a time. Forley Prester came and did not look at Tyrion when he said that no door had been forced, no guard cut, no blood drawn. He looked at the floor and seemed to be reading there the names of men who had served before him and would serve after. When the crown's advocate stood, Tyrion felt the old court creep into his back like a draft. The man was thin and dry and brittle and dangerous, and he had a way of making his words shiver at the end of phrases, like a falcon thinking of stooping. He did not speak of bread. He spoke of order. He spoke of the way children need fathers and cities, need crowns and crowns, need obedience and obedience, needs fear that has learned to call itself respect. He spoke very well until one of the poor fellows coughed and could not stop, and the whole room waited, and the cough unraveled the silken thread of the speech, as coughs will do. The advocate took a breath as if to start again, and the old man for the crone lifted a finger very slightly and spoke almost under his breath. "You have said your part, child. Sit." Oh. The advocate sat as if he had planned to all along. The room breathed. It was not a day. It was 3. Men went out to piss against the rock and came back with cups of small beer and eyes that had learned to be ashamed of themselves, and then learned to be proud. Bench weighed. The scales weighed. Tyrion stood when asked, and sat when told, and put his hand in his lap when his temper tried to spill out of it. He watched Aunt Jinna watch him. She did not frown, and therefore might have been pleased. He knew her too well to trust an absence. On the morning of the 4th day, the High Septon spoke. He did not look around to see that he had assembled every look. He looked instead at a little piece of the table where a nick had been carved by some proud knife long ago, and he spoke to it as if it were a sin too small to confess and too large to ignore. "The Father weighs," he said. "He has weighed the boy's death and the old man's, and these will be weighed again in a place no bench can make. He has weighed bread and lies and rope and pride. He has weighed a house that forgot itself and a city that remembered what a loaf is. He has weighed incest and found that no crown keeps it from stinking. He has weighed a brother's oath and a sister's serpent tongue. He has weighed a culvert and a bell." He paused. "On the claim of Casterly Rock, the Father weighs law. The rock is not the crown's plaything nor the king's toy. It belongs to House Lannister. The head of house is a king who is not of the house. The elder son of that house took white and cannot hold stone. The next son is the one who stands here. The bench rules that Casterly Rock is his by right of law and custom, subject to penances already declared, subject to the house's debts to the faith to be paid in coin and bread and justice." Then now, a sucking in of breath at once, like bellows. A woman's small laugh that was not derisive, just startled. Tyrion felt nothing at first. It was a shield that had grown on him piece by piece. He lowered it, and still there was no joy. only a fatigue that felt like a homecoming because he had always lived inside it. The old man for the crone had not finished. His eyes had gone to the crown's advocate, and were kind. As to the charges that would see this man dragged to a darker bench, the old man said, "Those are not forgotten. The king may call for them in the capital where a king's law is the ceiling. The faith calls for them here where the Father's law is. He will do penance in the city until the winter festival is done. He will go to King's Landing in the spring with the warriors' sons at his flanks and the poor fellows at his back, and he will stand before the boy and the mother and say what he said here. The world will hear what it has been pretending not to hear." Then see. The bench rose, and it was done. Not done. Begun. That was the trouble with benches. Men imagined them as endings because wood and stone were so stubborn. They were thresholds. Tyrion bowed as much to the mother's lamp as to the men and women who had sat beneath it. He turned into the room and felt hands touch him. Some eager, some testing. Aunt Jenna did not touch him. She came near enough that he could smell the soap in her sleeves and said, "If you die in the capital for this, I will be furious." "If I die," he said, "make certain the ledgers are kept." "I will." She adjusted a fold of his jerkin as if he were a boy who had dirt on his face, and then pressed her thumb into his shoulder until it hurt, which meant she was proud. Lyra Lefford's bailiff came and inclined his head. "My lady says the numbers add," he murmured. "She also says that if you begin to subtract the wrong things, she will come herself with a book and beat you with it like a rug." "I have always deserved it," Tyrion said. Sir Forley stood by a pillar near the nave, where he could have pretended to be a shadow. He did not pretend. He met Tyrion's eyes and nodded once. It was consent in a land where men had fought 100 little wars to keep from having to give it. Outside the sept, the sea was speaking, and men had learned, in the last days, to listen without assuming it meant doom. The bread tables were disassembled, because the same hands that had eaten on them were needed for other things, and the sisters bake sent rolls to those who had been up all night counting. The warriors' sons put their stars away behind their cloaks and looked like tired soldiers, which is what they were. At dusk, as the bells of the city found themselves again, and the rock answered by humming, as if content that for a moment, men understood scale, Tyrion climbed the stairs to the window that looked over the black. He did not take his lamp. He had learned to prefer the dark when it told him something true. He leaned his forehead against the salt cool stone and let the wind rinse him. He did not think of victory. He thought of the long road eastward, of the boy king and the mother and the court that would attempt to bury a bench with paper, of the ironmen nosing like boars along the coast, of rope and ovens and eggshells. He thought of Jaime walking the red dust of a river road with his ghost for company and writing on the world with his left hand as if learning a new alphabet. He thought of his father's chair, which he might sit in or not. The rock would not care. The rock cared only for hands set upon it that did not tremble when they did the work. He spoke the sea's words softly, and the sea took it and sent it back. And for a little he could pretend that was an answer. He turned away at last and went down into the halls that had not changed, and would a little, because men had brought lamps to them and had learned to keep them from making fire. He had kept his promise. He intended to keep it again tomorrow, and again the day after. Again, he thought, and the word did not make him smile this time. It made him hungry, which was better. Hunger drives more honest bargains than joy. He went in search of bread and a pen, and of the woman in the miners' quarter who knew which men lied with their eyes and which with their teeth. He went to find Harl, to send another pry to the tooth. He went to ask Sir Forley for keys that were not iron. He went to write to the Farmans about pegs, and to the Craycalls about tithes, and to Davin about banners that did not have to be used if men behaved like men who had counted the cost. The halls took him in. The rock hummed. The city breathed. The lamps burned without smoke. He set his hands upon the table, and the day upon his hands, and the work upon the day. The sea beat its one patient drum below, and bells answered it, and for one measured instant, the west seemed to be listening to the same song.